G-man stand, it's impossible to touch dance. I got a deranged temper with a short fuse. I don't know what you thought, but you gon' lose. I'm bad news. Satan turn me loose. Since Tupac got popped, who the fuck you think got the juice? Real dance.
Hi guys, Herbalist40 here, and thank you for joining me today. Right, so this is a very special episode. This is pretty much my masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. Like, I really wasn't expecting it to become what it has. It seems to be so big that I've had to do it in portions, so I can't really tell how long it's going to be until I've done. So I'm going to ask you all to bear with me. Trust me, I'm going to blow some fuses on this one. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. So, as I'm sure most of you have gathered already, it's clearly a reference to the Da Vinci Code, which was essentially a book written by Dan Brown, and that book was then transformed into a movie. And there was a sequel which was Angels and Demons, and I believe they're working on another sequel of these two books. I think there's one called Inferno, but they started doing that one and chose not to. So if you enjoy the movies, it's cool to know there's another one coming anyway, with the same characters, or the same main character, which we're going to get into in just a second. For those of you who don't know, the Da Vinci Code is centered for the main part around Paris, and also for those who don't know, I live in France, and just this weekend, it was Friday night, Friday the 13th, shit got bad over here, and that I'm pretty sure every single one of you is aware of. Yeah, terrible times. We're gonna find out here that Paris is an enlightened city. It's a beautiful place, and it holds so much culture, and I'll repeat, it is pretty much the foundation, or the main location at least, of the Da Vinci Code and everything that centers around it. Now, I decided just before we go on that we're going to make a quick stop here, and I'm just going to go over the characters of the movie and the general gist of what went on. So there's a certain amount of spoilers, but it's definitely worth it for understanding what I'm going to be talking about in the minutes to come. Okay, so on the top left hand corner we have Professor Robert Langdon, who's played by Tom Hanks, and he's the main character of the movie The Da Vinci Code, and he is a professor in symbology as far as I could gather in the movie. Underneath him is Detective Fash. He's a police officer, but he's also a member of an organisation called the Opus Dei. I'll explain a little bit more about that in the video. Moving on, underneath Fash, the guy with no name, I had to grab the picture somewhere else and forgot to put it in, but I believe from memory his name is Martin Saunier, and he is the Grand Master of the Priory of Sion. Again, I will be explaining what that is when the time comes in the video. Just for now, they are a branch of the Knights Templar, let's say, just for the moment. Moving to the next column and right to the top, we have Silas, and he is basically the antagonist of the movie for the most part. He's not the only antagonist. There's a lot of back and forth. It's quite an intricate little story, but he's a very interesting character that we're going to be looking into as well in the video. Underneath him is Sophie Neveu, and she is the granddaughter of the Grand Master of the Priory of Sion, which is the unnamed man just beneath her to the left. Underneath her directly we have, I think it's Bishop or something like that, Aringarosa, and he is a member of the Vatican. He is a high priest at least, so he's an important member of the Vatican. The column next to that we have Lee Teabing, and he is a friend, relation of Professor Langdon. He's a very knowledgeable man on all things relating to Christianity and religion in general. Underneath him is Remy, and Remy is his servant pretty much. Also, story goes back and forth, so that's how you see the characters when you first meet them. To the right of that, in the smaller boxes, you can see all the faces repeated, but in this order I'm basically just going to go over the little twists and turns, which is going to allow you to understand a little bit better what I'm going to be talking about. So at the top, the Grand Master of the Priory of Sion. As I said, he is the grandfather, or supposed grandfather, of Sophie Neveu. Turns out he just kind of adopted her, and we'll get into that later. Next to him, we have Professor Robert Langdon, and he basically was brought into the movie. Langdon was brought into the movie by the Grand Master of the Priory of Sion, Martin Saunier, because Martin Saunier, turns out, dies right at the beginning of the movie, and to keep it simple, writes Robert Langdon's name in blood in an effort to get him to come to the scene of his murder, so that Robert Langdon could carry out the investigation with the symbols that were presented. Underneath that, we have the High Priest of the Vatican, and he is essentially an antagonist as well. At the very beginning, you're not too certain, but turns out he's a very bad man, and he is also Silas's master. So whatever Silas does comes from his command. And also underneath Oringarosa, we have Detective Fash, the member of the Opus Dei, who is basically indirectly receiving orders from Oringarosa. He's under the belief that Oringarosa is a good member of the church and that he's trying to do good, he's trying to do God's will, and therefore Fash during the movie carries out his orders up until the point he realises he's just being used, and then flips on him, well, not necessarily flips on him, but then sides with Langdon, who at first Fash was trying to frame him for the murder of the Grand Master of the Priory of Sion. But anyway, that's a little bit detailed. Underneath that, we have T-Bing and Remy. Now, the reason I put them at the bottom is basically throughout half of the movie, I'd say you think that at least T-Bing is a friendly, and then towards the end of the movie, it turns out that he was the one orchestrating all the evil going on. So he is basically the main antagonist at the end of the movie. You figure out that he's the one doing all the bad and malevolent things. That's pretty much all I'm going to say for now. I know this is a little bit long. Again, bear with me, it's all worth it. Next up, I'm going to read you just a couple of passages from the Epsilon tracks, because they are very relevant to the video, and I need you to have them in mind at the beginning so that when these points come up, it makes sense. Okay, so first passage, chapter 1, verse 1, Omega. From Omega to Alpha and back again, and from Z to A, we as a people have consistently got things backwards. I know that now. Contrary to what you know, life is not life at all. It is an illusion. You are being controlled by lots of powerful forces you do not understand, like gravity. Just as an apple sometimes flies up from a tree and becomes a great eagle, so what seems like greed can in its own way be the most selfless act of all. Now, second and last passage is chapter 3, verse 7. The point of life is smiling, and nothing makes you smile more than knowing the true form. And the true form is 157 years old, and the great battle between craft and the unsavourables that exist in this paradigm, the 9th paradigm, and all preceding paradigms back to the 4th paradigm, this is a battle we must win. Just like the end of a movie, including those made and starring many top celebrities who are themselves Epsilonists. Just like most top philosophers and thinkers are. This is a battle we can win. So I read those out at a normal pace, and I hope you heard what I read out. If not, I would advise you to rewind and re-listen again, but that's up to you. I read it at a normal pace just not to waste too much time. That was the introduction. Let's get into the interesting business. Okay, let's try and get this done and not forget anything. This is the title right at the beginning of the movie. As you can see, the V is centered out before anything else, and I thought that was relevant in the sense that it is Grand Theft Auto 5 with a V as a Roman numeral. In this movie, the V represents the sacred feminine. It basically is in the shape of a woman's womb. Upside down, in the form of a pyramid, the V represents the sacred masculine, which is in symbolism representing the shape of a penis. So that's the symbolism as far as the V goes in the Da Vinci Code. Whether it's the same for Grand Theft Auto, quite possibly, and we'll look into that in a minute. Coming up now is, again, straight after the title, beginning of the movie, the Grand Master of the Priory of Sion here is escaping from Silas. Silas is attempting to kill him, as I explained earlier, I believe. This woman, we're going to come back to her in a minute. She's one of Leonardo da Vinci's paintings. We are going to discuss her in just a second. So as I said, he's being chased down, he's about to be murdered. These people couldn't find what the painting was, didn't look very hard, but I couldn't really find what this one was. The one that interested me most is coming up right now. The eye, followed by a bird's eye view. Now, for those of you who haven't really seen any of my previous work, it's something that I thought I'd bring up again. For those who have seen it, if it's a little bit too much, skip a few minutes forward. But here basically is mystery in the middle, and if you remember Malcolm, we get a big focus on the blue eyes right there, and then it goes from this scene to him outdoors pretty much in just a second. I didn't do too much editing, I do apologise. So here we go, he points up, it zooms out, and it forms an eye. Now I'm going to play it again. As you can see, he's about to point up to the sky, and it goes straight to the bird's eye view. Now this is something as well, when I mentioned Heroes, the same thing happened. Season 1, episode 1, right at the beginning. As you can see right here, this is Heroes. In my opinion, still very relevant. The eclipse, something we've spoken about, coming out from his eyeball. You could call that a bird's eye view, I guess, from the earth down. Here's Lost. This guy's Jack Shepherd. For those of you who haven't seen this, Jack Shepherd, I'm sure you have seen the Mackenzie Airfield with Jack Sheep Trimanifold, which basically anagrams into quite a few different things, which is also something we're going to be discussing in just a moment. So again, Lost, we have the eyeball followed by a bird's eye view. Every different series changes a little bit in style, but essentially it is the same thing. So one last time, as you can see here, Da Vinci Code, the eye, followed by a bird's eye view. No editing done there, that's straight away, instant. So that's 4 accounts of the exact same thing. I don't know how many I have to bring out for it to be certain. Sure, it's debatable, but you know, 4 times over, it's starting to be a little bit of an interesting pattern going on there. But anyway, as I said, we were going to be discussing this woman briefly. She is basically one of Leonardo's paintings, and she's called La Belle Ferronnière. And I'm just going to read a short passage here. She's a portrait of a woman usually attributed to Leonardo da Vinci in the Louvre. It is also known as a portrait of an unknown woman. The painting's title applied to as early as the 17th century, identifying the sitter as the wife or daughter of an ironmonger, was said to be discreetly alluding to a reputed mistress of Francis I of France. Married to Le Ferron, the tale is a romantic legend of revenge in which the aggrieved husband intentionally infects himself with syphilis, then passes it to the king through infecting his wife. Now, I'm going to show you in a minute why we're looking at this woman right now, but just that for a start, the fact that the husband not impregnates, that's the wrong word, sorry, I don't know what I'm on about. The husband decides to infect his wife in order to kill the king. Now that to me is interesting, and I'm going to just explain why we're looking at her now, and we're going to come back a little bit later when the element comes up to understand why exactly the husband passing an infection to his wife is interesting to us. So for right now, I want you to get a good look at Amanda's portrait. Now this portrait appears 2 times in Michael's house. The best view is the one in the upstairs room. Side by side, now admittedly, you have to understand they're 2 completely different people. therefore there are going to be differences in feature. But if you were to just research this, it's not about the person, it's about the geometry behind the photo. Look at the placement of the eyes, look at the way the nose tilts to the left, look how her gaze is looking to our right and her face looks to be turned to the left. There's definitely a similarity there. Now, this isn't just a unique painting that Da Vinci did. In his style, this is going to repeat itself, and I believe Amanda's is a combination of this one and the Mona Lisa, something that Wispy brought up a long time ago. We're going to put the paintings to one side just for this point, and we're going to focus on the next step in the movie, and this is the introduction of Professor Robert Langdon, and he's giving a speech on the interpretation of symbols. Now it's going to become clear in just a few images that this is an important lesson on duality and things that can have double meanings and jumping to conclusions, something that I've fallen victim to in the past, and I'll explain that in just a second. But for now, he shows this picture and everyone jumps in saying Ku Klux Klan. As you'll see on the screen right about now, in fact they're completely wrong. It's a group of priests in Spain who actually wear this attire and have worn this attire way before the Ku Klux Klan ever wore it. Second up here, he says, what do you think this is? And people jump in saying the Devil's Trident. She actually says it in French and it has to be translated to the Devil's Trident in English, and he says you're completely wrong, it's in fact Poseidon's trident. He'd be very disappointed to hear that. Now, the one that really caught my eye is the one coming up now, and this was the hippie symbol for peace and love, which is also a symbol for nuclear disarmament. But coming up now, you'll see that this part is an ambiguity. It's in fact an upside down Jesus, and I'm going to take a minute just to explain why this is wrong. The hippie symbol representing an upside down Jesus is basically nonsense. It was created in the 1970s, I believe. Don't hold me on that, but I think it was in the 70s. This was just created as propaganda pretty much. The real hippie symbol represents nuclear disarmament. That I'm pretty sure of. Now, the interesting connection here is not only do we have mention of nuclear explosions going on in GTA 5, but we have a very strong connection to hippies. They're tied to the aliens. I mean, all the way back from Truth and those missions in San Andreas, hippies have been a strong part of the Los Santos world. Now, here, take a look. He turns outside Le Louvre, the museum, and in the background there's a Ferris wheel. Now this Ferris wheel is called the Paris Eye, and there you can see that's Le Louvre, the big glass pyramid. Now here's the Ferris wheel, the real Ferris wheel with a picture, and it's got an obelisk next to it. So I did a bit of research, didn't take me long. The obelisk came up as Luxor obelisk. Now those of you who are already jumping in saying yeah, it's coming in a second, I did also want to mention they included this Ferris wheel in the background of the movie. However, they must have filmed it at a certain time of year, Christmas precisely, because that's the only time this thing's up. It's for the festive period of the year. So that's in Paris as well, just behind. This is all real. And some of you may have guessed it, as you can see on the screen now, the Luxor obelisk is, well, to me, there's a correlation here. Like, I don't. They must have known. There's no coincidence. Why would it be called the Luxor? And it's not just this gold one; it's the original one as well. Here, I want you to pay attention to the tallest obelisk of glass and steel holds no comparison to the world of craft. Okay, so we've gathered the idea that to find that particular tract we had to go to an obelisk of glass and steel, which is indeed the Maze Bank. Now here's an image of Le Louvre Museum in France, Paris. Now it's a pyramid of glass and steel of perfect geometry, and it's also an underground museum which includes an underground elevator, and the characters are going to appear in that elevator right now. Now the thing that I wanted to point out first, seeing as we're going to be focusing on the number 13, really important, you can see here that the max amount of people for this elevator is 13 people. Now by the end of this video, this number is going to come up so strongly, so I really need you to take that into your investigations as well when you're looking into the game. Someone brought up in the comment to this video that it also tied into the security truck image that I put in later in the video, so we'll check that out as well. But now you can see Professor Langdon's looking down here onto the vest of the investigator, Mr. Fash, and he notices this pin, and this is basically the clue in the movie telling you at the beginning that Fash is a member of the Opus Dei. Now, our game includes an incredible amount of detail. If you ever see this pin in any scene, cutscene on any character, I'd be very curious to know. It is a possibility, but the more interesting part of this elevator trip is going to come up right now. But here, Caravaggio. Now, it's an expo of Leonardo's work, but the title struck me as interesting because it is similar to Capolavoro, which is Italian for masterpiece. Now, Leonardo's masterpiece, if I'm not mistaken, is the Mona Lisa. Now, this is interesting because it's similar, but it's not quite enough. So I'm going to bring up another image, and that was the button they pressed as they entered the elevator, and you're going to see that it kind of ties it in a tight knot. So first things first, I said the elevator can only hold 13 people, and here right in the middle there, just above the finger, you can see salle 13. That means room 13 in French, so that's two accounts of the number 13. Paying attention to right now is peinture française, peinture italienne et espagnole. So that's French paintings, Italian paintings and Spanish paintings. Just to tie the knot quite tight, as I said, Capolavoro, the title is Italian and it is spoken in French and Spanish. So I know you have to stretch a little bit, but once again I like to say this, it's the addition of all the information that makes the point stronger, and that's why I encourage those of you who can to watch it all the way through. So just in case there was any doubt, I bring it up right now. Drama spoken simultaneously in French and Spanish. The title is Italian for masterpiece. So there we have our three languages. Okay, so once the elevator journey comes to an end, after the scenes that I just showed you, they come to the point where they see the body of Sophie's grandfather where he was lying dead on the ground in the museum, and this is a message that he wrote next to his body in blood, I assume, or some sort of maybe spit, because you can't actually see it without the use of a black light that Detective Fash pulls out. Now, I'm sure you all know this, but you might need a little reminder. When GTA came out, it came in a collector's edition. Those of us who got the collector's edition, myself not included, had this map which required a UV light to be able to read the secrets written on it. Now, there are a couple of elusive messages on this map, and most of them represent just little things like health packs and stuff like that you can find around the map. But there's another possibility, and we're going to jump ahead here just a little bit into the movie, and Professor Langdon is back at that same message we saw with the black, the black light, the UV light, and listen carefully to what's said here.
This phrase is meaningless unless you assume these letters are out of order too.
An anagram.
An anagram.
Okay, so this is why earlier I said we'd come back to this. They're going to go through a series of anagrams with the black light to understand what's going on, and this is the main anagram that we've worked with since the beginning of the mystery, so I thought it was interesting to bring that up as well. So seeing as they're using a black light to reveal anagrams, messages that feature anagrams, I thought it was also important to point out that the messages on our UV map might also be anagrams themselves. Now, you know, it'd be lucky if they were, but you can't really exclude it, seeing as already you know, at the beginning of this video, we're already on some solid paths here, some solid connections. But what you're looking at now is the final one that they come to, I believe, and it's So Dark, the Con of Men, or Con of Man, I can't really remember. The point is, con, if you look at that in an aspect of duality, a con is also a lie, it's a trick, it's a lie basically, and Epsilon speaks greatly of that, and Wispy pointed out recently what Chris says is to pick your own lies, and you're going to see throughout this video lies is a major factor of the story as well. Now pay attention to this very short clip.
This can't be this. The fleur-de-lis.
The fleur-de-lis.
Now, just have to be honest, I was most likely very fucking tired when I decided to make this screenshot, because the image of Franklin's auntie's room with the obelisk and the tree and the dove was supposed to be way back there with the Luxor obelisk, etc. Somehow it's ended up here. I'm not too sure how that happened. But anyway, fuck it. The fleur-de-lis. This is the fleur-de-lis. Now, as you can see, le fleur-de-lis or fleur-de-lis, plural fleur-de-lis, is a stylized lily. In French, fleur means flower and is means lily. Yeah, thank God for Wikipedia. Or iris, that is used as a decorative design or symbol. Now, an iris is another word for the pupil, the eye. So not only does it tie in with the aspects of the flowers, which is kind of new, I'll give you that, but the iris, the eye, as I showed you just a few minutes ago, is something that we really need to pay attention to. Now, Wispy showed you countless times the blue eyes. I'm starting to notice them more and more thanks to him, and it does lay out a pattern. But the reason I'm showing you these different designs of what a fleur-de-lis looks like, it's not just because it's a lily / an iris, it's because of the artwork in Michael's house. Now I'm just going to show you a series of images, and I think you agree with me, this is pretty insane, so just a second. Right, first up here, this is a portrait in Michael's house. Now this is a real life fleur-de-lis, one version of it. This is Michael's cabinet. Along the right hand side, fleur-de-lis symbols, that's why I showed you. You can feel free to jump back if you need to. And in the middle, that's a rose. We're going to save that for later. For now, concentrating on the fleur-de-lis. I showed you this box in my video of the castles a long time ago, and I thought the left symbol next to the castle could have been a turtle. Now I'm tending to believe it could be a fleur-de-lis symbol also, but the most interesting one of all was the spikes on the gates of the Epsilon building, because these are the clearest. It's a different take, but it definitely represents the symbol of a fleur-de-lis, and you're going to see that in this movie it's vital. Okay, so at this point in the story they have to make a getaway, because he's being framed for the murder of her grandfather, so they're trying to escape, and the car of choice happens to be a smart car. Now, it's kind of a controversial vehicle in the history of GTA, but it has been finally introduced properly in GTA 5. Now, they think it's based on a Punto, but it's not. It's definitely based on a smart car. But I thought I'd just point that out because it is an interesting connection. We are going to see just a couple of vehicles that tie in. Now we're coming back to the story of Silas. Now this is the Silas from the film itself, and here you can see he stabbed his dad in the back because his father attacked his mother, after which he ends up in jail and he converts to religion and he prays, and an earthquake occurs which releases him from his prison cell. Now in a second I'm going to read a passage about the real life Silas, who is in fact a man who accompanied Paul, and when I say Paul I'm referring to the same Paul that Wispy brought up in his video Decoding Trevor, which I'm sure you've all seen by now. So I'm going to read that passage now anyway. So, in the Da Vinci Code, he's freed by an earthquake that destroyed the prison walls. He found refuge with a young Spanish priest named Aringarosa, so that's the man we saw in the beginning, the member of the Vatican we saw in the beginning, who gave him his name Silas, after a person in the Bible who was the companion of Paul of Tarsus, imprisoned at Philippi. Note Trevor Phillips. and freed by an earthquake after singing. So Paul and Silas, in the story of the Bible, were freed from prison by an earthquake. And this is a great connection simply because of all the research we've led down the road of earthquakes and natural disasters. There's even been code that's been brought up, and as I've said many times before, the thing is with code is it shows you something, but if you don't understand the background to what you're looking at, you're just shooting in the dark, and that can lead into many circles of just ringing around the roses. It will take you nowhere. The important factor here is the repetition of the things like the blue eyes, the bird's eye view, birds in general, red hair, twins. All these things are majorly important in understanding how we're going to achieve all these things that people have managed to jump to too quick without understanding their background. So, you know, me and Wispy are good friends. We have been for months. I have to say, he's bang on the money. He really is. Paul, the Decoding Trevor thing is by far one of my favourite videos of him. It's outstanding. There's a lot of amazing videos amongst those 100 plus, but trust me, on that one, we're really closing in on the path we need to be set upon. Okay, so at this point Silas is trying to get ahead of everyone else, and he's trying to track down the treasure that basically the movie is portraying. And at this point I'm just going to make a quick stop, because what he's standing on is called a rose line, and it's a brass line that represents the Earth meridians, and it goes right through Paris. So the streets of Paris have this massive great big brass line that happened to come through this church. Now I'm going to explain why that's interesting. So the reason I just showed you that is because it ties to the lines that we're given at the observatory. There are also brass lines carved into the ground. That's a very big subject, and trust me, I will cover it very soon. That's going to be a video of its own, but there's definitely something to look into there. And I don't know if you caught it at the end, but he also said it hides beneath the rose. Moving along again, we're now given a background story about the Knights Templar and the Sacred Brotherhood, the Prior of Sion. Now he calls it a myth, but he tells the story anyway. Now I'm going to try and get this right. It was supposed to be a clip, but I had to obviously edit a lot of things due to copyright issues. So pretty much the Knights Templar were sent to the Holy Land Jerusalem to find a holy treasure. At which point they come back to the Pope with it, and at that point blackmail him into giving them unlimited power. By the 1300s they've become a bit of a nuisance towards the church, so the Pope and his followers, well, the Pope basically says that the Lord says it's his will to destroy the Prior of Sion and the Knights Templar because they have this holy treasure, and they blackmailed the church into giving them that strength. So basically, as you saw there, they set them alight on sticks, and that was on October 13th, 1307, so that's the origin of Friday the 13th. Now, it's important to carry on this myth. After that, apparently a group of the Knights Templar that were left decide to go into hiding and take their treasure with them, so the legend carries on, and they left behind the rose, which is just as important in symbolism as the fleur-de-lis. Now, at this point, Sophie interrupts the conversation to ask Professor Langdon what the treasure was, and she says she's never heard of any of this, and he says, yes, you have, everyone on Earth has. It's called the Holy Grail, and that's what I believe that we're looking for in this game, essentially, our Holy Grail. And I'm now pretty much convinced that at least one of our paths is this, and it will lead us to our jetpack. Now, I'm just going to play a very short extract that caught my ear, should I say. It made me think of UFO parts, so I thought I'd put it up there just to see what you guys think. I'll catch you in a sec.
You could have just handed me a piece of the UFO from Area 51.
So, the story of the Knights Templar, basically the origin of the unlucky day Friday the 13th, so a bit of history for you guys there. Now, the Knights Templar is littered all over this game pretty much, and the most obvious one was the hotels here, the Templar hotels, with the cross, which is very similar, just a little bit more abstract, but it is a Templar cross depending on how you look at it, and I'll show you some in just a second. In my last video I said I was going to be talking about these hotels, and here I am talking about them, but this is not what I wanted to talk about. Just as a little note, in an upcoming video I'm going to be talking about American Horror Story and all the seasons, and this latest season takes place in the Cecil Hotel, Los Angeles, and the Cecil Hotel is the Templar Hotel. They just changed the name and changed the design a little bit, but this is what the Templar Hotel is based on. Again, the number 13 you saw in that clip, I pointed it out with a couple of captions on the screen. The number 13 I'm going to tie back into the game in this video, it's just not the right moment, so hold on, and 13 will be also tied into Epsilon and what we've all been looking for. Now, here is a few examples of what a Templar cross can look like depending on the design. And we're going to go back to Michael's house right now, and I just wanted to take a quick look at Michael's coffee table. So that is a Templar cross that you can see, and around it are symbols for the rose. Now, this is all blowing my head off, like honestly, this is insane. Like, I can't believe the amount of connections there are here. So I'm going to repeat myself, Wispy Woods is dead on the money. I'm sure you all keep up to date with his videos. I for one have 110% faith in what he's talking about, always have done, to be completely honest. But yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope that you guys can also help me out with all of this. Like, I encourage you to go watch the movie if you have the time. I encourage you to go around the game and look at the architecture, because one thing I do want to say is that we're all very quick to say, Illuminati confirmed, but don't forget that those legends come from the Knights Templar. Right, so again I wanted to show you a clip here, but this is basically still images extracted from the TV series / documentary Curse of Oak Island that I've told you guys to go and check out many times before, and that now I'm starting to tie back into this mystery quite a lot as well. It's becoming a reoccurring clue, and we're going to see why it's really important in this video. This is going to be like putting a nail on it. Now, as I said, this is an extract from the documentary, just one of the episodes that's available, and they come to this church in France. They're accompanied by a real-life descendant of the original Knights Templar order, and there's features of Saint Mary Magdalene in this church, which is going to be a major part of the Da Vinci Code as well, and we're going to be coming to her when she comes into the story. I want you to pay attention to the History Channel logo, bottom right corner, the yellow H, because I'm coming back to that in a sec as well. But for now, concentrating on what they're doing in this church, they're taking a look at this particular statue of John the Baptist baptizing Jesus, and there's an anomaly basically, and that anomaly is at their feet there's this piece of corn. Now, the era that this statue is depicting, corn was non-existent. So it is a very big anomaly, and what they were basically explaining is that it hints towards the Templars travelling to Canada, where corn was very rich. He had a lot of it, and therefore would have brought back the knowledge of corn at that time, and which would explain why they would be depicting it at that point. But as far as Oak Island is concerned, their concern was this stone they found, which basically reads either the money pit or to guide corn down the narrow angle, which I've depicted on the screen right now. This is essentially a booby trap to the money pit. Now, I'm going to take a little second just to explain myself, because it is a bit of a mouthful. So, simply put, on Oak Island there is a hole, and it's called the Money Pit, and it's flooded by canal tunnels that link directly to the ocean around the island, and that's what I'm showing you on the screen. And they believe that the second translation they found for that stone plate was to drop corn down, drill a hole down to one of these canals, fill it up with corn so that it would stop the ocean water flooding it for a while, because the corn would swell, hence blocking it temporarily, allowing them to extract the treasure. And I'll repeat it as I have said it before in many videos, so it is repetition. The treasure believed to be down there was believed to be hidden by the Knights Templar and could possibly be the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant, or all of those combined. But anyway, so here I'm going to jump back to what I showed you earlier, which was the clue we were given to find this particular tract for the Epsilon. It says the tallest obelisk of glass and steel holds no comparison to the word of craft. Now that's very interesting, and this tract in particular is located on top of the maze bank. Now, in duality and words having double meanings, what is maze other than a maze? It can be corn, and as you just saw in the clip I showed you, corn is a very big correlation to the Knights Templar as far as those people were concerned. And who are those people, you might ask? Well, that's the Curse of Oak Island that I've been telling you guys about in many videos before. It's a real life mystery, it's one of the biggest mysteries the world has to offer, and that's the documentary from the History Channel dedicated into finding the treasure. And what's believed to be there? Well, possibly the treasure of the Knights Templar, the Holy Grail. So again, it ties right back into the Da Vinci Code, and if you're willing to be a little bit imaginative, it can tie back quite nicely into Grand Theft Auto 5 and the stories that we're showing you right now. Next up, I'm just going to show you a little picture of a building that I took opposite the Templar Hotel in GTA 5. So as I said, I took this right opposite the Templar Hotel, and it always made me think of the History Channel logo. So I don't know if they're just tying into like the sort of documentaries they put up there, because they're all very similar to what I just showed you. At this point, the movie takes us back to just after when Silas was inquiring about the rose line, the brass line that was in that church, and he was asking this nun that you can see her hand now. She's basically calling Inspector Fash, telling him that the lie has been uncovered, because he started smashing up the floor because he said that it hides beneath the rose. However, when he smashed up the floor, there was an opening, but what he found inside wasn't what he expected to find, and it was a stone inscribed with Job 3811. Now you can see on the screen, by simple addition of the numbers of Job 3811, we come back to 13 again. Now, Job 3811 was a way of mocking him in a sense, saying that you will go no further, pretty much, and yeah, he reacts pretty badly to that. Now, it was another reference to the number 13. And now the movie jumps back again to a different point where Professor Langdon and Sophie Neveu are directed to a bank, and they're about to enter this bank thanks to the key that had the fleur-de-lis on it that they found in the beginning of the movie, which I showed you guys. Now, the symbol that you can see on the floor that they're walking over right at the minute is basically a connection to the real Mr. Langdon, the real life Mr. Langdon, who influenced the creation of Robert Langdon in the Da Vinci Code. The real Mr. Langdon is an artist who paints in symbolism and symmetry and mirroring and all sorts of weird shit like that, and they had him design these logos for the movie, if I'm not mistaken. Now this one interested me because of a lot of things actually. If you were to split it in two and turn it the other way, it almost looks like two omega symbols stuck together, and what's undeniable is that it's pretty much a phi symbol, which is the missing tract in the, well, missing, it's not said that it's missing, but in the order that we're given the tracks, it's the missing one. Now underneath that we have the Z. Now in the beginning of this video I read you a few passages from the Epsilon tracks, and I said that they were going to be useful to hear for what was to come, and this is what I'm talking about, them telling us as a people we've constantly got things backwards and from Z to A, etc, etc, etc. I'm going to be deadly honest, I don't have the answers right here and now, but I feel strongly about this because of the amount of evidence that I can bring to the table. I'm willing to debate it with any single one of you. If anyone has anything to add or point out that I might be going down the wrong path and I should direct myself in another way, by all means please do. I encourage you to use the thumbs up and thumbs down buttons depending on how you feel on what I'm doing as well, guys. Like, if you agree with me on this, thumbs up for sure, add a little comment to explain why, but also with the thumbs down, I really don't mind the thumbs down. What I mind is I get thumbs, well, I get 1 or 2 here and there, but I never get a message to come with why you're giving me a thumbs down, and that can help me just as much. Moving on though, once they're inside the bank, they actually use the numbers that were featured in the first anagram right at the beginning of the movie, which is the Fibonacci sequence. It was out of order, they put it into order, and yeah, I've just got a tiny little clip here to say what happens before she presses enter.
Moment of truth. Moment of truth.
Pretty cool bit of script, I thought, but anyway, after they hit enter, it's obviously correct, and they get given this crate. Now, inside this crate, there's a tiny little box, as you can see here, and it has a little symbol for a rose on it, and it also holds inside what's called the cryptex. Now, I'm going to come back to that later because Wispy made an awesome point on that when we were talking about it. But I wanted to point out that we have a crate of our own in this game, and it is the crate that you can see on the screen right now, and that is obviously the Ultris camp crate, and I believe it only appears once you've cleared the Ultris mission right at the end when it's that massive shootout. So quite a gory scene, maybe similar to that of what happened to the Knights Templar. I don't know, maybe I'm stretching too much, but I'll come back to that in a second. Note that it says handle with care, extreme care. I didn't want to forget, because as I pointed out, the smart car, they have a bad incident in that bank. Like, the police are close behind them, so the bank security guard helps them escape by putting them inside this armoured truck. Now, I'm going to bring up the image of that and just speak of that for a second. So that was also something I didn't want to exclude. It's like the smart car, they were put into an armoured truck, and I also want to mention that these armoured trucks do feature on the UV map. There is a certain amount of mentions for them in the UV messages. Sorry if it's a little bit jumpy and repetitive, it's quite hard to actually re-edit something as long as this 3 times over. But anyway, at this point in the story they meet Lee Teabing, they come to his castle, and at this point he's a friendly, as I explained in the beginning, and he brings up mention of the guy who practically governed the Bible back in those days that he's referring to, and it's not necessarily very important to note why he's talking about him, it's more who he's talking about, and that is the pagan emperor Constantine. Now, this image in the background is Constantine being baptized practically on his deathbed, which is also another inaccuracy of the movie, and Lee's kind of explaining that, but I read on a forum that this is a little bit abstract as to whether they got it right or not, but it's more important to me because of what I'm going to show you next. And this brings me back to an Easter egg that me and Wispy found by complete accident just pissing around online a few months ago, and even back then we just said, oh, it's probably just a little cool Easter egg, but there was something wrong with this, and I remember saying it. It's Jonathan Constantine. His initial name was John, and in this case I believe we're supposed to separate, so the segregation that Wispy speaks of applies here as well. I believe we're supposed to look at Jonathan and then Constantine, as in 2 separate individuals, and they're both very interesting characters as far as Christianity goes. So now the story takes us back to Lee Teabing's castle, where they're discussing the matters of everything that's going on, pretty much, the Holy Grail, why they're here, the cryptex, etc. And at this point he brings up a picture of the Last Supper, and that again is something that Wispy made a video on. I believe by now it must have been a few months ago maybe. Anyway though, sticking to what they're talking about here, he's asking her what she can imagine in the scene, what she sees, and she says obviously wine and a grail, and he says, what grail? There's no cup. And at that point he zooms in and points out another anomaly, and this is even debatable in real life, although a lot of people agree that this is Saint Peter. He in the movie they side on the fact that she is Mary Magdalene, Jesus' wife, and that she is red of hair and that she has an ample bosom, blah blah blah. And what comes next is just a short clip that I hope is going to pass on what Sophie Never said when he reveals that this is Mary Magdalene.
I do know that's Mary Magdalene.
The prostitute?
The prostitute?
The prostitute?
She was no such thing.
So at this point I have to jump in and give some credit to my two buddies, Bry and Wispy. Now Bry brought it up, Wispy referenced it in his way, and again on the money. If you look at this as 157, or if you look at it like this, 5 plus 7 plus 1 is 13. The world is 157 years old. I've shown you Le Fleur de Lis, I've shown you the Templar crosses. We had the Friday the 13th update, which they didn't really have to bring out considering the amount of updates that came before and after. We've already got the Lowrider one that's already here. I think they did that to prove a point as well. But yeah, definitely a lot of interesting things going on here with Mary Magdalene being called a prostitute, which is a lie. And also you need to understand that in the church's eyes, Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene would be considered a forbidden love of sorts. So that, as you'll see in just a couple of minutes, holds major importance as well. Now at this point we come back to the image and they're going to use something that we've used many times before, and that's color inversion. And why do we use that? Due to the Epsilon program telling us that red is blue and blue is red, etc. And cyan or cyan turns into red, and as you can see here on the screen, he did exactly that with the picture of the Last Supper. He also points out that the Grail is in fact in the picture, and the Grail is in fact the shape formed between the fact that Mary Magdalene and Jesus are separated. They're both leaning different ways, and that shape in the background of useless space is supposed to represent the Grail. Now also another aspect that we got, and this came from the UFO above Fort Sankuda, I believe, it's written segregate and rearrange, something that Wispy has used in many clever ways since we've started our hunt. And in this case, as I'm sure you see, he took Mary Magdalene and moved her to the other side, which is segregating and rearranging the image to show her on Jesus's shoulder as a lover. And Robert Langdon said this is a lie, and as you can see on the screen, it was a caption from the clip. He replies, Lee Teabing replies, history makes it true. Another interesting point, they then go on to the ancient French word for Holy Grail, Sang Real, and as you can see, I thought of the segregation and rearranging and translation as well for de Santa, which is Spanish for of saints, but we're going to see later that the name is Italian in origin, even though it isn't the way of spelling of saints in Italian. Now here we want to focus on this image, and the reason for this is because, okay, so I don't know if you noticed how he was handling the box with the cryptex inside, but he was handling it with extreme care. Now, it's what's written on the Ultraist crate, and what was the first thing we all fucking did? Heaved it off a cliff. Now, this doesn't mean that we're going to have to get tweezers out, but maybe in more of a sense of think about it, do something a little bit more intelligent than just heave it off a cliff or blow it up with sticky bombs. There are many good ideas as to what we could do to open it, the sequence of right people that we would sacrifice, not sacrificing anyone at all, and achieving the unlocking of the box without even getting to that point in the story or getting to the massacre without bringing anyone there. There's possible ways that we can imagine how to do that, but for now I'm not too sure. Earlier I said the marriage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene would be considered a forbidden love, and if you just watch carefully and listen carefully, I think you're going to see what I mean by that. And also right at the beginning of the second clip you're going to see, it says she turns her face, or turned face. I'll point it out.
And he must have sung you the riddle songs.
And he must have sung you the riddle songs. Must have sung you the riddle songs. Destiny turned her face, my next and violent shades made
Yeah, so I thought that was a nice little addition to a couple things that Wispy hadn't brought external relevancy to in that song that he made in DGE Preview Part 1, I believe, or something like that. But anyway, now we're going to watch a couple of clips of just some interesting script, and I'll meet you again in a second.
The church's version of Christ is inaccurate. What if the world discovers that the greatest story ever told is actually a lie?
The greatest story ever told is actually a lie. The greatest story ever told is actually a lie.
C'est quoi votre problème avec les deux oiseaux là?
C'est quoi le problème avec tes deux oiseaux là? C'est quoi le problème avec tes deux oiseaux là?
So, as I said, two interesting bits of script. The first one being the greatest lie the world has ever known, and the second one being the what he said about les deux oiseaux is the two birds in French, and he's referring to Robert Langdon and Sophie Neveu. So I thought that was quite interesting as well, because myself, along with Wispy and Brian Treehorn, have brought a lot of relevancy to birds in the past. Simple one that I could just think of now is the Pianist building becoming the Penrith building, etc. There was also the hummingbird in the Rockstar Decay wallpaper, so you know, birds are quite interesting as well, if not very interesting. I'm going to risk it and try show another clip which is script wise quite interesting to us. I'm just, you know, quite like what he said.
Well, people rarely notice things right in front of their eyes, don't you find?
So I threw this in as a little reminder. Some look left, some look right. The answer is right in front of us. And for those of you who think this is a quote from Rockstar, because I've heard a lot of you refer to this as that, it's not. It's just this. It only comes from this mural in the game. They never quoted that. I'm pretty sure of it. Okay, so right at the beginning, I told you guys that T-Bing was in fact going to betray them all, and it's at this point that you realise he gives his guard Remy some whiskey, which turns out to be poison. And the reason I choose to bring this up along all the rest is because of the whiskey in Michael's house and the green juice that he drinks. Like, I don't know if we're going to go 100% on the connections. In the movie, whiskey turns out to be a poison. So I didn't want to leave that aside, because you never know. Like, we have the option to drink wine with Franklin and the whiskey with Michael. Different drinks for different characters, got to be something there, or maybe not, but you can't exclude it. Now, this is coming close to the end of the movie itself, and I again need you just to watch this very short clip that I hope is going to allow us to pass all this copyright bullshit.
There was every orb conceivable on that tomb except one. The orb which fell from the heavens and inspired Newton's life's work that incurred the wrath of the church until his dying day. A-P-P-L-E. Apple.
And that is why in the beginning I read the part of the Epsilon track that says, like gravity, as sometimes an apple flies up from a tree, etc. It basically refers quite nicely to this false idea that he was just explaining of Newton, because he's explaining it as a real one, but it's a false idea according to history and science. It's not true. It was in fact a comet that inspired Newton and not an apple, which is equally interesting to us anyway, because amongst earthquakes and all the other coding that's been brought up, we also have the comet or the asteroid or the meteorite, whatever you want to call it. But again, it's just interesting wordplay. Working out how we can fit it precisely is something a little bit more tedious, and it's going to take me and a lot of you, I hope, a little bit more time. Okay, so that was pretty much the end of the Da Vinci Code and the footage we were going to be seeing from that movie. That's pretty much full circle to the story. The one last thing I wanted to add is, after they opened that cryptex and he revealed that the code was Apple, and they realised, and he was talking about the orbs, they eventually find the resting place of Mary Magdalene, and it turns out she was under Le Louvre. She was underground, even underground the Underground Museum itself. So yeah, in that sense, he went from A to Z and back again, or from Z to A and back again. He had to retrace his steps. He had to go back to where it all started. Now, there was a lot of different bits from my original DeSanta code in this particular remake, should I say, but from now on all the information that's going to be said and revealed was not in the original. So, you know, even those of you who saw the first part who decided to skip this, you can now know, feel safe, everything from now on wasn't featured in my original documentary. So yeah, let's jump into that right away anyway. Right, so before we jump in with all the additional information that I've managed to gather since the first upload of the DeSanta Code, this was shortly after the first upload of the DeSanta Code that Wispy contacted me on Twitter and just sent me these pictures randomly so that I could use them if I was going to ever come back to it. And Lee Teebin basically made a mention of something called the Blade, or the Scepter, or the Staff in the Da Vinci Code movie. I think I might have edited that part out, but now you know he said that. Wispy caught up and sent me an image of this car, which is based on a 1960s Chevy Impala. And that really interests me because it is probably one of the most important factors and most residual factors of a TV show called Supernatural, and Supernatural is ram-packed with clues that we could use to understand further what they mean in these tracks and all the different cults and religious aspects we have in the game. Now, just one example from Supernatural which is really interesting, which could fit quite nicely into a Great Scott, is that basically after they defeat Lucifer, who's King of Hell, the man who takes his place is Aleister Crowley. Now, he is Scottish in origin and he's obviously dead, but his spirit, his dead form, takes the position of King of Hell once Lucifer gets dealt with. Now, he's a man, as I said, from Scotland, and he is considered to be the most evil human being who ever lived. He indulged in some really grim satanic rituals and just all sorts of odd rituals from around the world. The other interesting thing is that at one point in the series they introduce his mother, who is quite a big witch in a covenant of witches, and she's a redhead, also Scottish. So, you know, an interesting show with a lot of relations to religion, and a lot of it is fairly accurate as well. But next to that, we obviously have the homing launcher that we have in GTA 5, and again, this is Wispy that sent it to me. You see that it is based on the SA7 Grail. So who knows, maybe it says handle with extreme care. Has anyone really tried the crate with this? I don't know, maybe it includes different circumstances, the right people taken to the Ultras camp. I'm not too sure, but this is definitely an interesting find. It's similar missiles to the Buzzard and the Hydra and the Laser, you know, other interesting elements. So at this point we're gonna look into where my research took me after the movie The DeSanta Code, and I decided to direct myself towards Tom Hanks. And as you can see here, he starred in a film called Apollo 13 with Kevin Bacon. Obviously the number 13, Apollo, the trip to the moon, and then underneath that it's featuring 6 fun days when the moon is full, and that's an extract from a movie called Splash that he played in as well. So those two movies tie back to aspects of the moon, which is interesting to us because we have been following lunar cycles and certain things along those lines, lunar and solar eclipses also. But right here, what really caught my eye is this movie he played in called The Money Pit. Now, it was co-executive produced by Steven Spielberg, which is a highly interesting character. Wispy's mentioned him along the way, and he's also a guy that Tom Hanks has done a lot of work for and done, you know, wrote things with also as it played in his movies. But what really caught my eye here is the fact that it says for the location known as the Money Pit, see Oak Island, and that's what I said in the beginning of the DeSanta Code, the beginning of this film. I remember saying keep your eyes peeled, or remember the Money Pit, because we're going to be coming back to that. And it's interesting that they chose the same name for this movie, Tom Hanks being tied highly to the moon, etc. I did just miss it on the screen there, I do apologise, but if you need to, rewind. But basically it was Joe versus the Volcano, another movie that he starred in, and in this one he agrees to sacrifice himself to a strange cult-like tribe, and he agrees to sacrifice himself for their benefit by throwing himself into a volcano. I'm going to bring up another little mention to volcano in just a minute. Again, that's something we speculated about before, Mount Chiliad possibly being one. I've heard that theory. It all ties in nicely to the natural disaster box, should we say. But you know, this is just information for the minute. It's going to get a little bit better in just a second. The movie we have on the screen right now, though, Big, is really interesting. Now, I know Wispy just gave an awesome explanation on Zondar and Zolag, but at this point it says he used an antique arcade fortune teller machine called Zoltar. Now, very similar to Zondar or Zolag, maybe even a mixture of the two. And then it says playing music, the heart and soul, and chopsticks. So that caught my eye as well. But you know, 1988 as well, June 3rd. Just little bits of information that are going to help me build up to something else in just a sec. Last one I wanted to look at is a series that he wrote and starred in, and it's From Earth to the Moon. So again, this guy, most of what he works in, really, I mean it, most of the movies he's done relate to religion, the moon again, and Apollo, and he seems to be quite fascinated by these sorts of things. You've also got to remember that actors choose the type of work they like to do. He is kind of a choosy actor. I think he's the second best paid actor in the world or something like that, or most valuable actor in the world, something along those lines anyway. But here we're just on his Wikipedia page, and again, Apollo 13, that was an interesting one. He also received a Stanley Kubrick Britannia Award, so you know, another little connection to Kubrick, something that I keep meaning to come back to, but it's kind of a tricky one to approach if I'm honest. So again, you know, he's known for his collaboration with Steven Spielberg, as you can see, sort of in the middle there. Private Ryan, Catch Me If You Can, The Terminal, etc. And then it says Hanks, a series called Band of Brothers launched Hanks as a successful director, producer and writer in 2010. Spielberg and Hanks were executive producers on the HBO miniseries The Pacific, so that's what I said earlier, they did write together. Before marrying his second wife, this is some personal info on him, he converted to the Greek Orthodox Church, which is quite interesting to point out, and you will see why. His quote, which I'd like you to read if you have the time, which ends by, "The mystery is what I think it is, almost the grand unifying theory of mankind." Now, again, read his little quote, it's quite interesting. Underneath that though, it's tying to a political quote that he made, or two different political things that he engaged in. The first one being 2008's Proposition 8, which is an amendment to the California Constitution that defined marriage as a union only between a man and a woman. So he was voting for gay marriage to be accepted in California. That was thrown out, and as you can see on the second line that I've underlined in the third box, it says, while premiering a TV series in January 2009, Hanks called supporters of Proposition 8, un-American, and criticised the LDS Church. And he criticised them for not supporting that proposition. And basically, here's the Wikipedia page for this LDS Church, which is the Latter Day Saints of Jesus Christ. As you can see here, it's basically they're Mormons, but it's less common to call them that. And I've just highlighted some interesting parts. The LDS doctrines regarding the nature of God, which led me to something that we're going to see in a second. And then it mentions a pearl of great price. If you remember, the epsilon says religion is expensive or something along those lines, and that's where I caught the idea there. Moving along, it says though that the Latter Day Saints believe that Jesus Christ, under the direction of God the Father, leads the church. Okay, now remember that as well. Faithful members adhere to laws regarding sexual plurality, health, fasting and Sabbath observance, so they have ties to the Sabbath. Now this is the real life Los Angeles LDS Church. The first thing I need to say about this place is that the building isn't included in the game as far as I can tell. I am going to show you where I believe it should be, seeing as I know it is in real life on Santa Monica Boulevard, and the game counterpart to Santa Monica Boulevard is the Del Perro Boulevard. So I'm going to show you in just a second where I think it should be placed on Del Perro Boulevard and what's there instead of this. But for now, I want you to pay attention to the flowers that you can see at the bottom. Now, as those of you that have seen it, I'm pretty sure you recognise them immediately, but for those of you who haven't, I'm going to play a very short clip from one of Wispy's recent videos.
Mystery and very relevant with what I just showed you when it comes to Legend and Lily. Now, what you're looking at here is the Red King Humbert Canna Lily, okay? Now, the point here, alright, is I believe this is the exact plant that they're pointing to. Now, what I want you to take notice of is not only the colors, but the budding of the bulb, okay? Because the budding of the bulb is exactly what it looks like when...
So I thought it was interesting to point out they were the same flowers. So we had, here is the place I was telling you about where I believe it should be. You can see the ram's head, it had the crying mandatory sign, whereas usually around theatres it says no crying. And here's one of the interesting parts. We have the Grain of Truth building, and its logo is wheat, or at least I believe it is wheat. And you know, this is where I believe the building should be, somewhere around here, because it's just a street above Santa Monica Boulevard. So why it's not there, I'm not too sure. It could be for copyright reasons. But anyway, the most interesting thing is still to come, and it's basically where all this research has led me. But I'm going to go here and compare. This is a comparison of what the later day saints believe and what Christian perspective is. So the most significant area of departure is the rejection by the LDS Church of certain parts of ecumenical creeds such as the Nicene Creed, which defines the predominant view of the Christian God as a trinity of three separate persons in one essence. LDS Church theology includes the belief in a Godhead, composed of a God the Father, His Son Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost, as three separate persons who share a unity of purpose or will. However, they are viewed as three distinct beings making one Godhead. Other significant differences relate to the Church's acceptance of additional scripture doctrine and practices beyond what is found in the Catholic, Protestant, or Eastern Orthodox versions of the Bible, those that Tom Hanks believes in. Now, underneath that, we're going to read all of this. In the Latter-day Saint movement, a collection of independent church groups that trace their origins to Christian primitivists, movement founded by Joseph Smith in 1830, the Holy Ghost, or Holy Spirit, is considered the third distinct member of the Godhead. Again, if you remember the Epsilon tracks, it tells you to worship only one, and that would be the Godhead. Anyway, and to have a body of spirit, which makes him unlike the Father and the Son, who are said to have bodies as tangible as man's. According to the LDS doctrine, the Holy Spirit is believed to be a person with a body of spirit, able to pervade all words. Now, later day saints believe that the Holy Spirit is part of a divine council, but that the Father is greater than both the Son and the Holy Spirit. According to the official Latter-day Saint teaching, the Father, the Son, the Spirit are three distinct gods joined in purpose as one Godhead. But of this, some view Latter-day Saint theology as a form of tritheism. Okay, bear with me, it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's going to make sense. However, a number of Latter-day Saint sects, most notably the Community of Christ and the Church of Christ, and those sects separating from the Community of Christ and Church of Christ, follow a traditional Trinitarian theology. And we're going to go and investigate what this Trinity and Trinitarian theology is exactly, and this is an insane connection, insane clues, trust me. Right, so I included the Wikia page for this if you wanted to read through it, but the main thing we're going to be looking at is bottom right hand corner, and it is called the Shield of the Trinity. I'm going to bring that up on the screen for you right now in a little bit larger form. Okay, so this is the way Hanks would see it in his orthodox belief. Now, the Father is not the Holy Spirit is not the Son is not the Father. God is the Father, God is the Son, God is the Holy Spirit, hence a godhead, but all these three things are the same. They're all part of the godhead. Whereas in the Mormonistic view, if I'm not mistaken, if I haven't got myself confused in this bullshit, in their view, these are three distinct gods that form a godhead, generally speaking, but they're still individuals on their own, which is not the case in the Orthodox view of things. Now, I'm sure you can see the shape and form of this right here, so I'm going to bring up another image on the screen of what I'm sure you can see it resembles, and that is of course the Back to the Future flux capacitor. So this is a picture from the official Back to the Future game, so it is canon, it is official, it's cool. Read what it says, where I've underlined in red: shield eyes from light. Not protect, not cover, shield. What did I say this was called? The shield of the Trinity. The shield. The same word, the same form, and you're going to see in a second I overlay it on the Arcadius building, which is going to be very interesting as well. Right, so here we have it. This is the thing. The flux capacitor, as you can see, does fit over it, but it's not the entire geometry of this building. It also, on the ground, when you look from a bird's eye view, now I cut this image out myself, you can see that the shield of the Trinity fits perfectly with these lines pretty much. Had I done a cleaner job and got the right size, it would have fitted perfectly. So again, I believe these three elements are connected. It wasn't just the capacitor, there's a lot more to it, and that goes all the way back to the Future itself. This is not created just by Rockstar, we've been over this. It's a sequel of the same pattern, if you will. Also very interesting, I'm sure you didn't notice earlier, but if you were to rewind the Wikia page of the Trinity, this name was used, as you can see here, for a nuclear test, and it was a plutonium and uranium based nuclear bomb, and I've underlined it all here. You can see codename Trinity, and there's a bit of information of where that came from, although there's no real concrete answer. But also notice it's the Alamo Gordo bombing, that was the location, and I'm going to bring up a few images here about this Trinity nuclear test, the location, and some elements that we can correlate back to our game, I think. Okay, so first things first, I said uranium, plutonium. This is a breakdown image of what that bomb looked like. Also on site there was an obelisk, so I just keep my eye open for repetitions, things that repeat themselves. There's always a good sign of a solid clue. But here's the map, and as I said, bottom right hand corner underlined in red is Alamo Gordo. Then on their map also they have truth or consequences, which I couldn't really work out. Then they also have a lava bed, and then something del muerto, of the dead, and then it has rings around this desert, and one is 10 miles, and that made me think of the pilgrimage that Michael has to do for Epsilon as well. And then there's a little place called Mockingbird Gap. Those were the elements that I underlined on this map, all very interesting, and to me quite possibly they relate back to our game. Now here on the screen is the actual base camp for this nuclear explosion, and I feel that it resembles Stab City quite a lot. Now I'm not saying it is Stab City, but it could also be another one of these little locations similar to this that we have in the game. I'm not sure though. As usual, I'd love to hear what any of you guys think about all of this, but importantly as well, tell me if you think of another location that fits better to what that base looks like, because it's all about tying it together in the end and seeing ultimately what we can do with all of this. But here I brought up the Wikia page on the Alamo Sea in GTA 5, which is that bit of ocean up near Sandy Shores, right in the middle of the map, that looks like a Ninja Turtle. Now, it is affected by tides. Tides are relating to the moon, so a small connection. There's two triathlon missions that take place there. There's also the wreckage of the cargo plane, which I believe is tied to the Merryweather in the mission that said there, minor turbulence. and also it's advertised in real life as one of the most gay-friendly places in America. So if that's not a correlation straight back to what I was saying in the beginning about Hanks refuting the LDS, calling them idiots pretty much, and having to apologise for it, that was all for gay marriage. So there's a lot of connections here. It's kind of eerie, it's kind of weird actually. I really don't understand 100% where this is going, but it's definitely caught my attention. So we're going to have to finish up this video at some point, but for now, just on my research, I remember saying at one point Lester Crest, and that I was going to be coming back to the fact that he was called Lester Crest. So I've been doing a lot of research on crests, and this is the crest for a brotherhood that follows St. Peter, or the apostles Peter and Paul. And it says, the keys represent St. Peter, who were given to him by the Lord Jesus. The sword and the serpent represent Paul. So that's an interesting bit of information we get just by looking into the crest of the church of those who follow Peter and Paul. Next up on the screen, this is the crest or coat of arms of Michaelites. So they're a group or brotherhood or religious organisation that follow Saint Michael. And you can see here the colours yellow and red beautifully depict the spirit of the first defender of God's glory, Saint Michael. On the right there is a red sword of fire, the symbol of St. Michael, which expresses the first motto of our congregation, who is like God. And I remember Wispy telling me this one day. Michael's name, the name Michael, literally means who is like God. Now, on the left there are 3 ears of wheat. Remember the grain of truth mission, remember the corn, the family of maize and grain. And above them, le fleur de lis, which is also interesting. And at the bottom, something I can relate to, temperance and work, something I can really relate to with all the bullshit I've been going through just to get this video out. Whilst I was on my search for crests, I thought, why not just test a few of the big surnames that we have, and here we have Townley and De Santa. Now Townley, I bought it up because at the top, where it's written Townley on the bottom fresque, at the top fresque it says Tenez le vrai. Now I believe that's Old French for hold the truth. Note that on his crest there's 3 stars and a hawk on top of the helm. Now the De Santa crest features a rose in the middle and the colour is blue. Now I got these off a website that is very accurate in finding ancient family crests. So these are very accurate images that you're seeing on the screen right now. So you know, hold the truth and the rose. The rose ties all the way back into the De Santa code itself and the way they ended up finding the Holy Grail. Kind of to sum it all up, to finish off the video, I put in Phillips. Now you can see that it's kind of a weird looking beast. I don't think it is a lion, but what's more important and more interesting, it has a crown around its neck, and the crown is attached to a chain and it's being pulled backwards. So that was an interesting bit of symbology there for me. And to the right we have 2 possible outcomes for the family name Franklin, so probably 2 different origins. One features a fish with 2 lions and 2 birds, and the other one to the right features 3 red roosters. Now if that's not fucking interesting, I don't know what is. So there we go, this brings this video to an end. I hope I have no further copyright issues on this one. For those of you who like to rewatch my shit and who are watching this now, if there are any further copyright issues, fear not, I will fix it. I will not take no for a fucking answer. At the end of the day, I don't see why there's a fucking copyright issue in the first place, seeing as Dan Brown was initially sued because the church claimed that they had rights on all of this or something along those lines, and it was all thrown out of court anyway because there's no copyright on historic shit like this. So I don't see what they're giving me bullshit for when practically 90% of that movie is nothing but historic images free for the public to observe. So anyway, no, I'm not going to go on a rant, it's not worth it. I'll just leave it at that and say, as usual guys, take it easy, and until next time, see ya.